Children's. Hope, care, care.
Seattle Children's wants every child to live the healthiest and most fulfilling life possible. That includes making sure children and teens are protected from COVID-19. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and will help protect your child from illness and hospitalization. This isn't about beating the odds, it's about changing them for all kidkind. Get your child vaccinated today.
Welcome to our talk today. My name's Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the publisher and CEO of Parent Map. We are really thrilled to have you here today with what we consider to be some of the most outstanding publishing media for parents around the country. And they join us: Chicago Parent, Metro Family in Detroit, New York Family, and New Jersey Family. And they are partners with us in this 22-23 Parenting Ed Talk series. So thanks for joining us today. Today's event, a parenting playbook for raising the happiest kids on earth, with cultural researcher and parenting expert, Jessica Joelle Alexander. I'm outrageously excited. I happen to have gone to school at the University of Copenhagen, so I have a firsthand feel for how outrageously wonderful that country is in raising happy kids. So we're going to learn a lot. So on behalf of our magnificent media partners across the country, it's our collective passion and it's our business to help build inclusive, safe, educated, and loving communities for our families. We are really laser focused on how to better serve families and parents. And as publishers, I feel like we never settle for the status quo. We are dedicated to building this community and learning together. So before we kick off with Jessica, we would love if you would just take a minute and in the chat, let us know where you're coming from, what city you're in. We'd love to see all the different cities pop up on the screen, and just put that in the Zoom chat. So one other thing, we are giving away this new bassinet. It is I think around a $1,600 retail bassinet. It sounds insane, but it is a lifesaver. So we are giving one of those away and a $500 Happiest Baby gift card, courtesy of the Happiest Baby group. And winners will be notified after the event today. Today's webinar is being recorded. Everybody who registered will get a copy of the recording, and we use it for educational and promotional usage. And we'd also love to hear your thoughts and questions. So please use the Q&A. We will curate those questions and ask them at the end. And then closed caption is also enabled by clicking the Zoom closed caption or the CC at the bottom of your screen. Again, thank you to our media partners, Chicago Parent, Metro Parent in Detroit, New Jersey Family, and New York Family. Thank you also to our presenting sponsor, Seattle Children's Hospital, and to our platinum event sponsor, the Gates Foundation Discovery Center, and also to Seattle Country Day School as a gold sponsor. So Danish parenting expert Jessica Joelle Alexander is a best-selling author, New York Times, Time, BBC World News, Vanity Fair, NPR, and Huffington Post featured writer, as well as the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, you name it. She's the author of 3 books that have been published in more than 32 countries: The Danish Way of Parenting, What the Happiest People in the World Know About Raising Confident, Capable Kids. It's one of the most sold parenting books of all time. Alexander writes a regular column in the Copenhagen Post and researches and writes for the University of California, Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute. So please welcome. We're so thrilled to have you, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I wish I could see everybody.
I'll if you can't see the chat, I love that we have people from Brooklyn, Gig Harbor, Nigeria.
Wow.
So we've got quite a widespread audience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Yes, so my name is Jessica Joelle Alexander, and it's pretty much been my life's work for the last 15 years to share something that has completely changed my life as a person and as a parent. And yeah, I believe in it very, very deeply. And so I would like to tell you a little bit today about how the Danish Way of Parenting came to existence, how it was born, let's say, and a little bit of the backstory. And then we will talk about the 6 pillars of the Danish Way of Parenting and follow up with some questions and answers. It's difficult to cover everything in 45 minutes, but we'll do our best. So I'm American, and I have been married to a Dane for 20 years. I've lived in many different countries. I speak 4 languages, and I've always been very interested in cultural differences. I've been studying cultural differences for many years. When I met my husband and I went to Denmark for the first time, I have to admit that I wasn't what you would consider a maternal person. So the thought of having children absolutely terrified me. And when I went to Denmark and I saw the children there, I started to change my mind, because the kids there are extremely calm, serene, well-behaved, respectful. And I remember saying to my husband all of those years ago, if I could get a guarantee that I'd have a Danish child, I was ready for motherhood. So anyone who's been to Denmark, I think probably knows what I mean. There is just a calm and a serenity that I haven't seen anywhere else. So what was interesting when I finally had children of my own was I noticed that while I had studied cultural differences, the cultural differences in terms of parenting were the most dogmatic that I had ever seen. So in England, parents had a very clear idea of how babies, how you had to feed them at what time. At that time, there was a parenting author, Nina Ford, who was very popular. So it was very regimented. In Italy, the pediatricians would have you put pasta and Parmesan and olive oil in the bottles when you would wean them off milk. In Japan, kids take metros at 8. In Belgium, they were allowed to taste beer. So I started finding, wow, there's such dogmatic beliefs about different cultures, about parenting. And I started questioning my own, what do I believe as an American? And I must be affected by my own culture. And I wasn't even aware of how. Obviously, the Danish way had already been greatly influencing me a lot. But it wasn't until one day I was reading in the newspaper and I read that Denmark had been voted as the happiest country in the world. So this was interesting for me. Again, as an American, we're very interested in happiness. There's many books written about it, programs, and yet here was this country that was voted the #1 happiest in the world. But it wasn't just that year. For 40 years in a row, Denmark is always voted in the top 3. This year, happiness results #2. And since at that time, I had been using the Danish Way of Parenting in my own life, and I had really seen the difference, I was convinced that it was the parenting that was contributing to the happiness. Because happy children grow up to be happy parents who raise happy children, and it becomes a cycle. And so at that moment, I knew that I had to write about this because it had changed me. the most non-maternal person, so profoundly, I was convinced it could help others. And so together with the Danish psychotherapist, we conceptualized the Danish Way of Parenting, which sort of many Danish parents seem to inherently know. And it's been cited in many academic papers. It's taught in some universities. So it's become a very known parenting theory. And it's really simple. This is the beautiful thing. So we're going to talk now about the 6 tenets of the parenting model, which is based on the acronym PARENT. So P is for play, A is authenticity, R, reframing, E, empathy, N, no ultimatums, and T is for togetherness and hygge. I always feel like a cheerleader when I tell all my letters here, but we're going to start with play. So many years ago, I would talk to my husband about what did he do when he was a child. Did he do an instrument? Did he do karate? What things was he learning when he was little? And he always said, I played. And this for me was really strange because I thought he was avoiding the question. I said, yeah, but come on, what did you do? Like, what activities were you involved in? And eventually, when I had my own children and I began to really learn about the Danish way, I found out that in Denmark, play is considered the most important thing that a child can do. So the idea of enrolling kids in a lot of activities or having them learn different things when they're younger is very strange, because they believe that the most important learning that a child can do is through free play. So that's not adult-led. It's not with the objective of learning something, gaining a trophy, etc. It's coming from the child. So since 1871 in Denmark, free play has been considered an educational theory. So it's literally, we trust the child to learn. Now this is very different than the American way, because in America, it's, at least when I was growing up, it was very much, how fast could you learn to read or do your letters or do your numbers? And in fact, at that time, I had given my daughter as many educational toys as I could because I wanted to educate her. And so it took me really stepping back and believing in the power of play. And I know this is talked about more and more these days, but I cannot stress how much the foundational base that it's giving children. And all of the research shows that play is teaching skills like empathy, negotiation skills, resilience. It's helping them learn to cope with stress because they're putting themselves into, fearful situations, swinging from trees or jumping on rocks. And only the child knows how much stress they can handle. And this is contributing to them being able to handle anxiety later in life. And many researchers believe that the decline in play in America is directly correlated with the increase in anxiety. So I could say, what would the advice for play be? The very famous toy brand Lego is actually a Danish brand. It's based on the words "leg godt" put together, which means play well. So when in doubt, allow your child freedom to be bored. It's the birthplace of creativity. And I would say try to find other parents who believe in play and allow this natural learning from the child. It also dramatically reduces stress of the parents for not taking our kids to a million activities. So that's play in a nutshell. Now we move on to A, which is authenticity. If anyone has seen Danish movies, you will know that many of them do not have happy endings. And when I first started watching Danish films, I would get a shock because they were, really definitely not the typical American movie. And this was true for children's stories as well. So my husband's parents, they would give us all these books, and I was very shocked at some of the subject matter. You name it, we had a book about it. And it took me some time to understand what was going on. But what I discovered is that in Denmark, the belief is that children need to learn about all aspects of life and all emotions. And so no topic is taboo. In fact, if it's taboo, it's probably in a book, but in an age-appropriate way. So the belief is that, life is not a fairy tale. Life does not always have a happy ending. And the sooner that we teach our children about this, the more resilient they become, because they don't get a shock that, it's not just princesses and princes. And one of the great examples of this is The Little Mermaid, which is actually a Danish fairy tale originally. Many people don't know that the original Little Mermaid, the mermaid does not get the prince. She actually dies of sadness and turns into sea foam. Now, I have read both versions with my daughter, and she actually preferred the sad version. It opened up all kinds of interesting conversations, and it was a wonderful example for me of how talking about difficult subjects was preparing us for actually many situations that we had later in life. So the idea of authenticity is that we have a responsibility to sort of teach our kids about all emotions. Very often we get hung up with the idea that it should always be happy. And Danes view emotions a little bit like colors on a color wheel. So if life was all yellow, it would be very boring. And the more that we teach our kids about all the emotions, the richer their lives are. And again, the less they get surprised or toppled by life's peaks and valleys. So recommendation with authenticity would be look for those stories that embrace all kinds of aspects of life, whether that's death or divorce or making babies, whatever it is, in an age-appropriate way. If it's part of life, it should be part of education. So there's other aspects to authenticity, but that's, let's say, the authenticity in a nutshell. So the next letter is reframing, R for reframing. And this, I used to think that Danes had a magic power, because every time I would say something negative, there was always a way to come back in a sort of more positive way. And I don't mean in an exaggerated way. So it's not in this idea that everything is awesome and everything's always, happy and wonderful. But they seem to have this ability to find the positive details in a negative situation. So it's not that they negate that negativity exists. It's just that they're very good at finding more nuanced ways to look at a situation. So I don't know if you know that Denmark they don't have bad weather in Denmark. They have bad clothing. So there's a very popular saying, which is, there's no bad weather, there's only bad clothing. This is a very classic example of reframing. So what psychologists would call Danes would be a realistic optimist. So again, it's not that they pretend that negativity doesn't exist. It's just training yourself to find the better storyline. And this can be done with your language. So we know through research that when you change your language to be more positive, it actually changes the way you feel. So it literally affects the chemistry, your brain chemistry, if you work on changing your language. Now, as humans, we are evolutionarily wired to see negativity. This protected us. It helped us look for snakes. It helped us look for things that could harm us. And so very often it's a default setting for us to see negativity. But when you realize that, we can actually reprogram ourselves. And it not only changes us, but it will change our children's future. Because the more you're able to reframe, the better you feel and the happier you are. So some of the ways that they do this is really in their language choices. So they try to avoid, let's say, more black and white language. Very often, I remember if I was with my husband and I would say, "Oh, I hate that," he would be like, "Hate's a strong word." I say, okay, I dislike it immensely. So this idea of using very strong black and white language, generally they would avoid. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of reframing, and this way, so you can see how it changes the feeling of the thing I'm saying. So I hate flying. I'm a terrible cook. And I can't stand my mother-in-law. It's not true. Now I'm going to reframe these. I really like traveling when I get off the airplane. I'm a pretty good cook when I can follow a YouTube recipe. And I don't always get along with my mother-in-law, but she's amazing with the kids. So these are just 3 examples of exactly the same scenario, but I have reworded them in a way that makes them have a completely different feeling. So reframing takes practice. Danes are so good at it because it's just a default setting. They learn to reframe in school. They reframe with their children in their language. And so again, it becomes a bit of a legacy and becomes natural when children learn it from when they're very young. But another place that they reframe, which I think is very powerful, is in not using negative labels. So if you think about how you define yourself now as an adult, most of us will find that the labels we have for ourselves, even today, came from our childhood. So you could say, I'm not a math person, or I'm so messy, or I'm lazy. A lot of these labels came from our childhood. And in Denmark, you will rarely hear parents negatively labeling their children, because this, ironically, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Very often, the same thing that we're trying to change, the behavior that we're trying to change, becomes more. Oh, he's so annoying. Oh, she's so distracted. He's not athletic. You know, all of these things, we say them not thinking so much about them, but the child thinks, well, if my mom thinks I'm like this and my teachers think I'm like this, then I must be like this. And it can become so ingrained. So a very powerful way to reframe, something I do in workshops with parents very often, is I have them write down all of the labels that they're using with their child, and try to find the more positive element of this. It doesn't have to be exactly the opposite, but it can be helping build up the positive storyline for our children rather than the negative one. And this takes practice and awareness to hear, but it is life-changing for yourself and also for your child. So for example, a stubborn child may be very persistent. A bossy child may be a wonderful leader. A distracted child may be very artistic. And so the more we build up these storylines for our kids, the better they feel. I'd like to give you an example of a personal example. I mean, now again, Danes do this naturally. So for other cultures, for myself, I have to work on it. But it's probably one of the elements that has helped me the most in my personal life and as a parent. So when my son was 3, he had a phase where he had to have a specific toy all the time. And he woke up in the morning, he had to have the toy. He ate the breakfast, everywhere. And I think it was a car. It's a red car. And if he didn't have the car, it was a crisis situation. So one day we went out to a barbecue and we forgot the car. And we heard about this all day long. And he was whining about the car and crying, asking about the car. And he didn't forget all day long. So now it's the afternoon, evening, and we're driving back, and he starts again about the car. And I am like going to lose my mind. And I know this Danish way, and I'm about to freak out. And I look, and my husband, who's driving, he looks at me and he says, I'm so glad he's like this. God, I'm so glad he's like this. And I'm like, what? He said, yeah. He's amazing. He doesn't give up. He knows what he wants. He doesn't stop. He knows what he wants. This is going to be an amazing characteristic for him when he gets older. And I was like, ow, that's reframing. He was serious. So, this is just another way to build up a very positive storyline. And we can always do that for our children and for our children's friends. So that brings us, in fact, to empathy. So empathy is a huge element of the Danish parenting and education model. Denmark is also voted as one of the most empathic countries in the world. And this is because they have empathy is a huge part of their education system. From the time they are under 1 until 16, empathy is taught in the classroom. It is considered just as important as, I would say, maybe even more important than reading is reading other people. And if anybody's interested, actually the course, I have a course on this. It's very innovative, the way that they teach empathy in school. And Denmark also has the lowest rate of bullying in Europe. Some of the ways that they teach empathy at home is with the language they use. They're very often pointing out the good in others. It's not a competition, it's very collaborative. So even in play with little kids, whether it's with dinosaurs or dolls, you'll often hear, oh, look, she's being very sweet, or how to take care of each other. And this is a really big focus and it's very different culturally, because in America, I think one of our cultural default settings is it's a very I win culture. America is the most individualistic culture in the world. And whether we're aware of it or not, we have this constant, it's very competitive. It's a very I win culture. And a lot of this is not very conducive to empathy. Empathy is much more about fostering collaboration, failing, highlighting our failures. In Denmark, fail is described as the first attempt in learning. And it's also not overriding children's emotions. So I can see this is being talked about a lot more these days. But in Denmark, they believe that children have a right to their senses and their feelings. And so there's this idea that it's called equal dignity. And children are seen as extremely competent from the time they're very young. And thus this idea of saying, yes, you are happy. Stop being sad. Stop crying. Be happy. Yes, you are hungry. So in Denmark, especially your senses, they believe that children have a right to feel exactly as they feel. And it's really important that we acknowledge that, because this is how they had empathy for themselves. And this has been very enlightening for me as an adult, because it really affects every aspect of our self-trust. And what do I mean by that? Well, if a child is constantly overridden and we tell them, yes, you are hungry, or yes, you are cold, and no, you're not sad, then when you get older, it can be very difficult to be very in tune with how we feel and to have a distrust of our own emotions. So this idea of acknowledging how a child feels, putting words onto their emotions, I see you're mad, using the words "for me" at the end of a statement. For example, if a child says, "I'm not cold," and you can say, "Oh, well, it's very cold for me." That's separating me from you, and it's acknowledging your feelings. So maybe you take a jacket and allow the child to discover maybe they are cold. But there's a lot of ways that they infuse empathy into the culture. And another final way I will mention is this idea of reading all kinds of stories has been proven to foster empathy. So this is another great reason to pick up some different kinds of books to read and stories to see. So this brings us to N, which is for no ultimatums. Now, when I was first together with my husband, we had a lot of discussions about discipline. So I was veritably obsessed with how we were going to discipline our children. I don't even think we had children yet, but I was really obsessed with it. And he would say, what is this thing with discipline? We will manage issues. Like, we don't have to think so much about the discipline. And what I would discover is that in Denmark, they have a very democratic approach to, I wouldn't even use the word discipline. They have a very democratic approach with children. And as I mentioned before, from the time they are babies, children are considered extremely competent. There is this idea of equal dignity, and there is a very low power distance. So a power distance means, for example, if you're a parent and a child, or a teacher and a child, or a boss and a subordinate, where there's a high difference, the power is, when you revere the power, the person that has the power. In Denmark, they don't like there to be a big power distance. They believe that, everybody is worthy of respect. And that includes children, especially children. And this was very different for me because I grew up in a very authoritarian family where it was sort of my way or the highway. And it took me a lot to get used to this idea the idea is that there's no question that as a parent, we have the power. The question is how we're going to use that power. And they believe that because we have the power, we have so much responsibility that comes with the power. So that means they really like to have their children respect them, not fear them. And this, again, is quite different, culturally speaking, than I would say in America. Again, America's huge. There's a lot of different parenting styles, but coming back to this idea that we're built on survival of the fittest and very competitive and kind of I win, you lose. This is also very much seen in the way we discipline, and we're not even aware of it. So this was like a huge eye-opener for me from a cultural perspective, to realize that a lot of my parenting was also based on this, like, how am I going to win? And how am I going to get my child to obey rather than to collaborate? And this is where I started becoming aware that Danes don't use ultimatums very much. And if you think about it, that's because when you use an ultimatum, you're immediately going into a conflict. You're immediately going into an I win, you lose situation. So you won't hear many ultimatums. You almost never hear yelling in Denmark. Usually when you do, it's a foreigner. Spanking. So I'm sure many people have different thoughts on this, but I was spanked. It's very, very prevalent still, way more than I like to think. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't married a Dane, to be honest, because I hadn't even thought about it. I discovered that Denmark, spanking has been illegal for over 20 years. It is an unthinkable way to educate a child. And for those of you who think that's obvious, well, there's many people that are not aware of that. In Denmark, you can actually be arrested if you're hitting a child. It's against the law. I did some research. This is not a great map because it's black and white, but just to give you an idea, these are all the countries where spanking is illegal. So that gives you an idea of how many places it's legal. And in the US, I mean, there's a lot of cases now where even schools are bringing back corporal punishment. So this was a really, wow, eye-opener. Obviously, yeah, this was not going to be in our wheelhouse of things to use in terms of getting the child to do what you want. So I would say the way that Danish parents view themselves is as a lighthouse. So the idea is that you send consistent signals and your child will learn to navigate their own lives. So it's not about control, it's not about fear, it's about sending consistent signals. And very often the ultimatums that we are using are just habits. And another thing I like to do in workshops with parents is I have them write down a lot of the ultimatums that they're using on a regular basis and try to reframe them. Because so often it's just, I call it the parental answering machine. It's what's been programmed into us from our own parents and then from their grandparents. And if we don't think about it, we just repeat it. So we quickly go to say, if you don't do that, you don't get an iPad, or if you don't do that, then you can't do this. So reframing it would be, let's say, okay, hurry up and get your shoes on so we can go listen to your favorite song in the car. Or, let's go brush your teeth so we have more time to read a book. There's so many ways that you can reframe ultimatums and avoid getting into these power struggles. And already that is a wonderful way to get out of this kind of conflict and power struggles. So this is just one example. There's many more. I highly recommend also reading the No Ultimatums chapter. It's has a lot of cultural comparisons as well. So sorry if I feel like I'm going very fast, but it's a lot to cover in 45 minutes. This brings us to one of my favorites, and I wanted to leave some extra time to talk about this because it is so Danish and it is so life-changing. That is the T for togetherness and hygge. Maybe you've heard the word hygge. It went into the English dictionary in 2016. It is spelled Hygge. And it is something that I was aware of from day one, because it's you cannot have a conversation with a Danish person without hearing the word. It is an adjective, an adverb, a noun, a state of being. Essentially, what hygge means is cozy times. It's coziness. It's cozy times with the people you care about. Now, it has been so commercialized, and people think hygge is candles and cozy blankets and yummy food and coffee. And yes, hygge is all of those things, but that's sort of the superficial view of hygge, because Denmark's cold, so lighting candles and having cozy blankets. But hygge, and why it is so tied to the happiness results year after year, is so much more. And I'm going to explain that. So hygge for a non-Dane, I believe, is much more of a psychological space. So try to imagine that you're going into a family gathering, and before you enter this hygge space, you all agree to take off your negativity, complaining, bragging, You take all of this stuff off, anything that's subtly divisive, and you leave it at the door. Just like if you were taking off your shoes or your coat or your jacket, you leave these things at the door. And you come in, and it is a team effort. So it's not that one person gets stuck doing all the cooking or doing all the cleaning or whatever. Everybody helps out. The idea of hygge is a way to be together with the people you love in presence and being there, and to think of it as we time and not me time. And the reason I stress this is because it's so normal for us to go into family gatherings and to have our own stuff going on in our head, or to get into some kind of negative story about work, or bring up some negative thing from the past, or somebody's bragging about how awesome their job is. And while that's fine, it's subtly divisive, because somebody else may not be in that same space, right? When I used to meet my Danish family, I used to wonder, they're not really asking me what's going on in my life. And that's because in the hygge space, nobody cares. In the hygge, that you're there to be with the ones you love. It's not about all the things in the outside world. You can talk about that stuff any other time. But for the hygge time, we agree that we will leave all of that stuff outside. So what can you do? Well, you can tell and retell uplifting stories. So many families have wonderful memories from when they're younger, but we forget to talk about these things. And this is very connecting. So when you tell and retell nice memories from the past, it automatically connects you. Enjoy the food. Be present in the moment, talking about the food. Sing. I don't know if we're ready for that, but Danes are huge singers. This used to make me totally weirded out in the beginning, but then when I stopped feeling like a dork, I got into it, and it's very hygge, singing together. And this is something you can also do with your child, right? So I'm talking about a family gathering because the idea of hygge has completely changed my American family. So every family has their habits. And in my family, we had the habit to talk about other family members or complain. And once we sort of agreed that we were going to practice hygge, it just has totally changed our dynamics. Because again, it's not that we don't ever have other times where we can share, bad things, or, bring all these things up that are not in that space. Controversial discussions, politics, not hygge. And so it's not that we don't still have those moments, but we are starting to be aware, like, okay, in this moment, we're not. And the biggest beneficiaries of hygge are the children, because they absolutely love to spend drama-free time with their families where there's no negativity. And while it is actually a bit of work to make this happen for us, our kids will grow up to do it naturally. And that is something to really think about. Another really hygge thing to do is to play games. So Danes are massive board game players and ball and anything, because this is another way to be present with the people you care about in a positive way. So for anyone that actually wants to try it out, we have something called the hygge oath, which if you go to thedanishway.com, you can actually download the hygge oath and print it out. Many people have told me they put it on their refrigerators because, again, this takes everybody to be part of it for hygge to work. It's not, you can't do it alone. It's we. And one of the ways that I describe it, which I think is really nice, probably many of you have heard about mindfulness. So mindfulness is this idea of being in the moment, being present, having your, letting your thoughts go. And all the research is showing, whoa, my computer's falling. All the research is showing that mindfulness is an absolute huge factor in well-being and happiness. I believe Danes have evolved mindfulness, and Hygge is not mindfulness, it's we-fulness. So it's being present with the people you love. And when you get the hang of it, it is just, I cannot tell you how nice it is, how uplifting it is, and recharging for the soul to be with those meaningful relationships in these ways. And so, yes, so for anyone who's interested, they can download that. I want to leave it open for some questions now. So I'm going to turn it back over to you. And if anybody has questions.
First of all, I cannot thank you enough. I know, we have so many amazing questions. I'm going to lead with the second question for you to think about, because there are dozens of inquiries about screen time. We're going to put that in back. And then the first one that I want to raise is, it sounds like you had this master trainer with your husband in really kind of re-educating and orienting your thoughts around parenting. And could you start by assuming that you have two parties who want to do the best for their children, but they individually could have come from very broken, challenged, disruptive childhoods, and how to help get these two impactful teachers for their children to this place?
I mean, I do think it would help to read the book. Honestly,
yes,
you can read it in a day. It's not a long book. It's really easy. And as I say, because as you can hear, I mean, I came from a very different background, and I think if you can just decide two things you want to change. So this was it for me. I was like there's I definitely didn't want to spank, obviously. And there was a couple of other things I really didn't want to repeat. There was a lot of wonderful things that I did want to repeat. But I think it's important that you have this discussion and then choose a few things, and you have to be a team, right? And so I think if parents overwhelm themselves with, oh my God, we have to be this, then you just set yourself up for feeling like a failure and maybe giving up. But I think if you choose one or two things that you want to change and you work on it together, that's already going to change the future.
Yeah, and I'm gonna restate that just because you're gently promoting the book. It is probably the best gigantic fast leap that parents can do to get in the same place, regardless where they come from. And if you have this desire to have this kind of lifestyle, then I really hope people take you up on that. So the second question really is, there's so many issues around screen time, and just can you bring that into the conversation and how you have seen it dealt with?
Yes. So I'm actually working on a project right now about this. I'm bringing the Danish way of raising digital citizens, because I know it's such a huge topic. And one of the main things I would say is that it's in Denmark, they have something called they're aftale. So they're always working with their kids to make agreements. So they're starting screens very young in Denmark, but that's also because there's a sort of a way, right, that the schools and the parents are educating the children, which we don't have in other cultures. So it is more challenging because we have to do more at home. But it's very important that you're talking a lot with your kids and coming up with agreements together. Again, giving them power to have input into what is reasonable. how much time is reasonable to do everything in our day, and to get everything done that we need to do and have screen time. So it's always about sort of including them rather than making them, controlling them, and having them come up with the ideas together, a contract together, and therefore they're more in charge of their own screen time. I know this doesn't work for smaller kids, but it's always along the same lines, that you're involving them in the knowledge around screen time, in how it is addictive. It's teaching them, even from a young age, the truth about tech companies and what and how these things release dopamine and make us feel right. And how do you feel when you're out in nature for an hour? How do you feel when you spend too much time on the, it's helping them learn and involving them in the structure of the rules.
I love the way that the approach is just honoring. It sounds very Plato-like, honoring this young person as a whole person that has all the capacities, really, if spoken to correctly and not down to, that they can appreciate that. So this is a good question given your kids' ages, I think, as well. This is a person's question. My kids are 13 and 16. Is it too late for them to be the happiest kids on earth?
I mean, again, happiest kids on earth. This is, this is, I don't think it's ever too late to work with your kids. Of course, when they get into the teen years, they're more independent and it's harder. But I think some of the best things you can still do is to try to create this hygge. Find something that they like to do that you can do together with them, and keep that connection as strong as possible. I think that's the most we can do, while respecting their independence and individuality, because they are programmed to separate, right? And so it's a bit of a balance, but hygge is good.
There's questions about sibling rivalry, and how do you integrate this approach to, the nonstop battling in your household?
So this comes back to this idea of like empathy, and this was a big one for me, a big learning curve for me with my two kids. One was try not to compare them, and really build them up when they're being nice to each other. So, even I was talking about how they teach empathy weirdly when they're playing with cars. You hear being like, oh, isn't he so sweet? Or is it like the language even in play is so different, fostering that thinking about someone else and caring about someone else and taking care of someone else. And since kids really do want to please us, I think if you start very young, showing them that it really matters to you when they're nice to each other, and making a big thing when they've helped their little brother, or they help their little sister, or this kind of thing makes a really big difference. So it's not a magic wand, but it's something that if you build up over time, I think it has a really fantastic effect on their overall relationship.
Mm-hmm. I'm nervous because my laptop is about to die, and I'm trying to get someone to get me my How do you recommend this can be changed in your household and you can work on your parenting? Oh, my son-in-law just saved the day. What about working within the school environment and bringing this concept to community into schools?
I mean, sharing it, talking about it.
You've mastered this approach within your family, and you're communicating it to, the positivity and the levels of empathy. And do you have any examples of how people have taken this into, the structure of a school?
Yeah, I've done a lot of consulting in different schools in different countries, and we've implemented this program they have in the Danish schools. And again, there's a course here that anybody who's watching this gets 50% off this course, where I'm talking about what they do in the school. And it's so simple. And it's an hour a week. And we have seen humongous differences from taking this 1 hour, and it's called the classes hour. And actually there's teachers in New Jersey that like read about it and were using it and said, oh my God, I can't believe how something so simple has made such a difference in also academics. So it's a whole thing. It's difficult to explain, but it's some of these things are so simple, but they're just so profound that I feel like it's just about getting the word out in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we jump to the next question, we're going to pause for 1 second, and we're going to put up a poll so that we can get a little bit more detail on how everyone signed up for the talk. And while we do that, I'll go to the next question, which is, any way to weave some of this wisdom into the massive use of social media?
Again, yeah, it's funny. I'm literally working on these cards right now that are coming out soon, because I feel like Danes are really good at, they have a sort of, they have this wonderful education program, and parents know about it and teachers know about it, and it's streamlined. Mm-hmm. And the issue, I think, in other cultures is that the school is teaching one thing and maybe parents are teaching, or not teaching, and we're not sure what our kids know. And so we're afraid. And in our fear, we aim oftentimes to control, or to put controls on, or to put, if you think about how you react sometimes when you're scared, even you get grumpier and angrier. And this is just our kids' reality. So it's really much more about getting curious, keeping it simple, having these conversations. Just like I talked about authenticity, it's like start having the conversations about these things in an open way to foster communication rather than fear. Mm-hmm. And this is science. Now all the research that's being done is showing this is the best protection. Having these conversations. It's just hard for us because we don't always know where to start. It feels overwhelming, right? Like, so much to cover, and it's changing, but there are some real basics, and I think, yeah, stay tuned, because my motto is, I say, instead of don't say no, say no, KNOW. Mm-hmm. Right, for parents.
I love that. I love that. I'll finish with this question. I mean, I think you bring up so many points that are endemic to, overgeneralizing America.
Yeah.
But having lived in Denmark, and, it is really, we have so much to battle that we take for granted, that comes, that the stimuli and that comes our way. And so this last question, I think, ties to that. Please inspire us to integrate calm and non-time, relaxing time, no play dates, no hangouts, just empty space into the everyday, as compared to cramming more and more and more into the schedule.
So I don't understand the question.
Inspire us. I think it's a closing, where you have to fight back.
Yeah.
Against what from the competitiveness to the resume,
so hard
to get your kids into college, like the whole thing. So I think it's just a way to land the talk in an inspiring way that really integrates your whole philosophy.
I totally get it. It's super hard. Whenever I'm in the States, I'm like, God, it's so hard here, because it's all around you. And I do feel it's so competitive, and it's just, that's what I mean. Like, it's so part of our culture. I think the first step is like to just see it, that this is such an effect, and try to find some other parents. And like, there's a Danish Way Facebook group, like, I don't know, try to find some other parents that sort of have the same beliefs. Mm-hmm. And if you just start even with the free play or the hygge, get the hygge oath and try hygge with some friends or your family, and just
Right.
and they want to please us, and this is like about them, you know, and giving them that calm, giving them their childhood.
I think that's such a, you and I were talking before we got on about our author, Laura Kastner, and one of my favorite lines that she talks about, which therapists talk about all the time, is opposite action. And as a parent, if you feel propelled to get into that competitive nature, pull it back. And really, it's such great wisdom. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. There's a ton of questions and there's a ton of appreciation, you know, for the wisdom that you've brought today. We hope everyone will join us for our next talk, actually, which is the habits of highly effective adolescents, with people might know of Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, Christine Carter, and it's going to be moderated by Laura Kastner, the author of Getting to Calm. So we hope you'll join us, and thank you again, Jessica.
Thank you. Such a
Wonderful
pleasure
to have you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.